Courtney Campbell, in our office, we decided that we are no longer allowed to use the word unprecedented to describe this fall. What word would you substitute in its place?
I've been going with strange. I believe in calling things what they are. I would also like to add, we are not allowed to use the word pivot to the list.
I like that.
Unprecedented, and we're not pivoting anymore.
I keep on hearing new normal in the sentence of, I don't want to call it the new normal, but the new normal is. And no, we're moving away from new normal, pivot, unprecedented. I'll pivot away from pivoting. Many of us spent the majority of the last 6 months at home. However, in that time, what is the show or movie that has been on your watch list that you just couldn't find the time to watch?
I finally watched Parks and Rec.
Hey, there you go.
Like all of it.
Nice. Well, that's what we do now, right? You just binge it through.
I needed the lightness, but it did take me almost 6 months to pull it off.
Ozark's been sitting there for me forever, so it's people keep saying
I've been rewatching a lot of ESPN's 30 for 30 documentaries. That's been my big thing.
That'll get you through. And then finally, since you're not traveling this year, what are you going to miss about Boston? I would say West Roxbury, but that might just be a Dunkin' Donuts.
Okay, so we know I'm not going to say the traffic. I miss the fact that, fall travel season's great because I would get to go to games at Fenway. My dog's name is Poppy. She's named after David Ortiz. Bare minimum, I miss driving by Fenway. But yeah, that's it.
That's good. All right, let's get into it. Now that we got everyone here, let's talk about test optional policies, which is the best thing to talk about as we're starting the morning. It gets us fired up. So Davidson College made the choice to go test optional in fall 2021. You were among many schools that made that choice. As someone who is involved, I would guess, just from your position in that choice, what did that decision-making process look like? Like if you were to take us into the room, I'm sure there are very clear reasons why you needed to do it or why you had to do it. Maybe why would you want to do it? And is there things about that choice that maybe has made you nervous or excited as you start to embrace this test option policy?
When it came to making the decision, it was really a no-brainer for us. And I say that with the caveat of the fact that I had asked for years and pushed for years for Davidson to go test optional because it's in line with the way that we actually review applications. For years, I would always look at students and say, testing is the last thing that we consider. And I would walk them through the holistic process, right? But I would often have these savvy kids who would look at me and then go, then why do you require it, right?
Yep.
And that was always my point. And so when we were sitting in late March, the writing was on the wall, and we didn't know that we were going to be here 6 months later with me still working out of my living room and not traveling. But the writing was on the wall that, this was just not going to be the year, the time to add the additional stress of testing to the component. I think that colleges by and large were pretty good at, there's an issue right now. There will be an issue for the near future. And we have just watched that spin out over time. Yes, we had to sit in a room and have conversations with our faculty admission committee about what our process would look like. But here's the thing, everything that I was saying to your students over my time at Davidson about the way we review applications and what we value in applications. And I will tell you, when I say we, yes, predominantly I'm talking about Davidson, but I was on a panel with Lafayette, Gettysburg, and Denison yesterday, and we got a similar question, and we were all in agreement that the way that we look at your students really does already emphasize the work that they're doing at Catholic Memorial, their performance in their classes. It allows us to really embrace their writing through the essays, the recommendations, the co-curricular activities, and there are so many things that impact testing in times that we always kind of looked at testing as, yeah, that tells us something, but not that much. And that's the point that we were making to our faculty, because we always have to say, well, this is what it looks like if a student has access to incredible test prep, opportunities. This is what it looks like if a student's school actually offers SAT or ACT preparation classes. And it's very, very different for students who cannot access that assistance. The way and places where we grow up impact our vocabulary, our grammar, our understanding of certain kind of facets that are tested with or that are looked at within testing that don't actually serve as true reflections of potential or intelligence. And so we've always put a lot more stock in these other things. So it was actually a very quick move for us. Higher ed is not known for quick, and I'm going to use the word I just said that we shouldn't use.
No. Don't do it. Don't do it.
And this was, I think, the fastest I've seen Davidson move on something in ages. And then what we've seen over time is, I don't think any of us, if we kind of looked in the future and said, all right, it's going to be tough, I don't think any of us would have known that, you know, students would register for tests, show up at sites and find out that their tests were canceled.
Right.
We didn't know about just the extreme challenge that students were going to find, even just being able to sit the test. We also didn't know or think about the risks that students and their families would take to take tests. And so now schools are even having more and more conversations about test blind. As we're hearing from families, we're seeing the angst and anxiety of, but what does test optional really mean? It means you want it, right? And when I'm looking at you and saying Davidson is test optional, and I can vouch for those 3 other schools I was with yesterday, test optional means truly that. If students had had the opportunity to take tests and they were happy with their results, share those results. If they took it one time and thought, oh, I'm going to take it again, and they didn't get to, it's up to the student whether or not they want to submit that. If they never get to take a test, that's not a problem. Because when we're saying test optional, we're truly embracing that. I actually went onto our website yesterday, I direct our communications, and I had a conversation with my dean, and I said, you know, we're still saying that we require testing for homeschool students because we have to have some sort of metric if we understand an educational philosophy. And I said, we're going to have to pull back on that and change the language and say that we'll waive that requirement for at least this cycle. And he took a deep breath and he was like, that's what you think? And I said, yeah. And I said, I'm going to go make the change. And he said, okay, it's the right thing to do. So sometimes the conversations are that simple, but there's more positive intent in work than I think families and students believe, because we really do want your students to be safe. We want them to be healthy. And really, I want them to be sane, right? So this testing component has reached a pitch over the years. We launched this as a 3-year pilot program. Every indication I have is that we will remain test optional.
So, and I guess maybe thinking about that decision, and as you said, you adjusted very quickly to that, but you also, you're well connected in the field, you know a lot of people in admission. What is the opposing view to that? Like if someone was to say, no, we need to hold on to testing even in this moment when we're going to test, is there a way it could, you know, I'm not going to require it in admissions, but we want to see a test in financial aid. Are there concerns like that maybe at other places, or is that, does test optional, if someone says it, it means test optional everywhere always?
So I think that there are some really, there are just some historic ties to what the value of testing is. I think you look at the NCAA.
Yeah.
I think you look at scholarship programs. I think that you look at large flagship state institutions that don't necessarily use a holistic process, not because they don't care about your students, but because they get 40,000 applicants a year, and there are still humans interacting with those applications, but what they have to often do is have some sort of parameters that narrow the funnel of those applications so that for people like me can actually get in there and do the work. And so I think that, you know, for a place like Davidson or small liberal arts colleges who already embrace this, whatever holistic application process means, it was easier to make that move, right? Because we have our system mapped out and we were already de-emphasizing testing. But I think that there are certain metrics that are set up institutionally
Mhm.
take longer to break down. And I think that, you know, initially a lot of schools and places that were saying, nope, we're going to hold to testing. You've seen them very, and I mean very,
Very. Yep.
make the changes, but like systems that you never thought.
Mhm.
The fact that the Ivies did it.
Yep.
I mean, you know, the Ivies are often out front, and I'm not slamming them. Fantastic, amazing institutions. I know why they are as selective and special as they are, but they've often led the charge in so many things because they can, because they have the endowments to, they have the platforms to, they have the cachet to, but they are also older and they're a little bit more entrenched in their systems and their processes. And so I think that that's a big part of it, but you're starting to see that shift because you're seeing the humanity of places saying, yeah, the system is something we've relied on, but that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean it's something that we need to hold to. There's a laundry list of just
Mhm.
really awful things that we can point to with COVID and the global pandemic. But quite frankly, there are some things that I think that in this field, you and I, at least, I know it causes stress for families.
Sure.
And I can be excited about because this is going to precipitate and has precipitated changes that have needed to happen.
Yes.
You know, I had somebody refer to me the other day as, well, you're just kind of a compassionate disruptor. And I'm like, I like the fact that you're couching it with the word compassionate. Yeah, I think that this field needed some disruption.
Mhm.
It's interesting to see, you know, if you think families are freaking out, it's really interesting to see the ACT and the College Board freaking out right now, because you want to talk about institutions that are entrenched, they're going to have to figure out a new normal, a new model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that entrenchment is such a powerful word that we see a lot of institutions kind of retreating back to. And in a very, you know, let's recenter on Davidson, I would say, in terms of the way that you are able to adapt to the moment and change and meet it. You know, we keep on using the term holistic admissions, and we made the joke before. It's funny because technically speaking, it kind of involves everything. It's academic, it's non-academic, it's context. So as counselors, we try to have our students develop an authentic narrative in their application. It captures their entire life experience. Not an easy thing to do, but we try to shrink it down. And then that's supported by the counselor letter, by the teacher recommendation letters, and school profile. When that comes to your side of the desk, how do you make sense of all that information to determine the fit between student and school when it's not necessarily that hard number that is a test?
Right. So I think that's a really interesting question, and it's one that students ask us a lot, right? And we think about the application as a puzzle, and all of those different components are the individual pieces of that puzzle. And it's really hard to look at your students. And I was telling Jack that I hosted an essay writing workshop on Monday night for about 350 kids in a Zoom webinar. And, you know, we're having an individual breakout session on the essay. And in that, the first thing I say to them is, yes, this is a designated program just about your essay, but there is no one part of your application that carries the most weight. There's no one part that's really going to dictate things. And so we look at these different puzzle pieces that come together so that we can gain an understanding of how prepared your student is, not to come to our campus, but to thrive on our campus. And I work for a really special place, and I recognize that. I've worked for Davidson for 12 years, and there's a reason that I stay. And it's that as we are reading applications, as I am meeting with students right now from my living room, part of my job is to see, yes, is that person a good fit for us? Could they come and be successful? Could they make the most of the opportunities that we put in front of them? And can they do it in 4 years? Right? Because my job is complete when a student walks across the graduation stage in 4 years. That was a statement that was made to me in my interview process 12 years ago. And it's quite frankly, one of the main reasons I said yes, because I liked that emphasis, particularly as a first generation college student myself. So as we're looking at things, the thing that I will tell you we put a lot of weight on is the work that a student has done at his or her high school, right? Because if my job is to say, what are you going to make of the opportunity that Davidson offers to you? I want to see that students have made the most of the opportunities within their individual high schools. So it is not the expectation when I am reading an applicant from Catholic Memorial that they mirror perfectly a student from Rocks Latin. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not my expectation, because I am looking at a student within the context of CM and RL. That's what I'm doing. It's an individual thing, but I want to see that they've stepped up and embraced challenge, that they've moved beyond their comfort zones, because that tells me a little bit about what type of student they will be, that they're willing to get uncomfortable, that there's an intentionality with the way that they chart their course, right? Because that's something that we really look for. Self-awareness and intentionality in an application are big, big draws. Well, like me. We're going to look at grades, of course, because we want to see that that challenge is met with success. And I think that students and families are hardwired to think that success comes solely in the form of A's. We like A's. I think A's are fantastic and I love seeing them. But I would rather see a student step up and embrace challenge and maybe get shock, horror, a B in a course and have to really work for that B, because it's also going to be more indicative of the college experience for them. So those two things across all 4 years, and we really do look at all 4 years, gives us this understanding of the foundation in place that will allow the student to be successful.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you were touching on it already. And one of the things that Davidson, you know, we know it in our field, but maybe some of the parents on the call aren't familiar with this. You have one of the highest freshman retention rates in the country. You have one of the highest full-year graduation rates in the country. Those numbers aren't accidental, as you said about your interview, where that was kind of built into you, of your job is complete when someone walks across the graduation stage. So, you know, maybe go a little bit deeper into that. Is that an analytical process? How do you identify those key traits and then say, this is an applicant who will be successful here? Like, what are those obstacles or what are those challenges that they've overcome?
So I think the hard truth about places like Davidson is the vast majority of our students who apply could get in and do the work. They've done their research, they're working with their counselors, they've identified us as a potential good fit. And so all of those things in place, you know, most of the students I read are very strong academic candidates. What I often talk about is the academics right? And so working at Davidson, that is in that wonderful model of the liberal arts, and the schools that I most commonly cross-app with that you all will likely know a little bit better, Bowdoin, Amherst, Williams, those are our overlaps, right? And so I'm really lucky working with students in the Northeast who value the liberal arts, right? But as I'm working with students, there's this added layer that I seek to identify, a willingness to get out of their comfort zone. So I want the liberal arts, but I want it somewhere different, right? Yep. A willingness to be a little bit adventurous and a willingness to not always be the best at things. A student who wants to break free from a traditional echo chamber. And those are going to come through in the way that the student approaches the application essay. It's going to come through in the way that their schools talk about them. And what I often tell students when you think about recommendations is it is the school counselor's job. My dog's going to sing to the neighborhood and I'm just going to close. Hey.
2020, it's what it is, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yoga too. I think that what I am looking for, and I'm thrown off a little bit now, what I'm looking for is that a student has really been mindful in their choice, and it goes through their research. And so as a college counselor is writing on behalf of a student, they are shining a spotlight on the student within their school environment, right? And we fully get that, you know, smaller schools have the opportunity to know their students a little bit better. larger schools, it's a little bit harder for the counselor to know that, but we're still looking for a sense of understanding. If we don't get that from the counselor, we're going really wholeheartedly toward the school profile. A teacher's job within the recommendations, and this is where it's really important for students to choose wisely. A teacher's job is to shine a spotlight on the student within the academic sphere. And one of the things we love hearing about is how the student responds to challenge. So I think a lot of students default to, I'm going to ask the teacher where I made the best grade. I'm going to ask the teacher where it was really easy for me. And that's one thing that, sure, if every class was easy for your student, they're going to have a range of great teachers who are going to tell us that they work hard, they turn their assignments in on time, and they were really thoughtfully engaged in class. But what we really love to hear and what we look for is that level of engagement in class, in that they're raising their hand, they're encouraging other students, they're active in discussion. We're happy to hear about a time when a student struggled and they actually approached the teacher for extra assistance, extra work, questions, that they went above and beyond. So sometimes teachers where students have struggled a little bit more write really great recommendations. And then Davidson and Dartmouth are the two schools that do this. We ask for a peer recommendation because I'm not just looking for fit academically. I am looking for fit within community. We're a student body of 2,000, and that 2,000, is this incredibly active, intentional, engaged student body. And so for us to hear from someone who's not an adult in the student's life is incredibly helpful. So we're looking for students who are academically prepared, who are committed to, community, who are really just interested in something different, that they're capable of having thoughtful conversations. They're capable of engaging with people who are different than they are. And I think that also what we're finding is we see students who value things like Davidson's honor code. We see a commitment to service, a commitment to the understanding that you're not just going to get a lot from your college experience, but that you are going to be expected to give back from that. So I think maybe you all saw in the chat
I don't know if I put it into the chat for everyone. My camera I think your dog knocked my camera loose in my office.
Oh, copy.
We're having a heck of a morning here, but if you can hear me okay, I'm multitasking trying to get it back up, but if we can hear, then we're okay. I think that's so helpful, and to sort of like pull it back a little bit. I think something that is very difficult this year that people have always liked about the numbers on an SAT or an ACT is that it creates maybe an illusion of fairness. It's a number that people can point to, and sometimes people think numbers are fair. As you think about this cycle, one of those in a holistic admissions, and we keep on using that term, one of those challenges is that issue of fairness. So inside of your office, how do you double check those puzzle pieces? How do you double check that the decisions you're making are fair, and that you're making choices that are best for a potential class?
To kind of jump on the numbers thing, I always I've actually made this statement before: numbers are fair if they work in your favor. And that's something that we've said to our faculty about testing. When it comes to fairness, this is a tough thing to navigate because college admission, particularly in the way that I work within it, is still a very human process. It does not always feel humane to students and their families as they move through. But I think what the beauty of the committee structure is that I think that most families and students, will never see. They see how it's depicted in movies. They see, tables with people who just love saying no, right? Actually, people who do what I do for a living love saying yes. And we go into applications with positive intent. We go into every application thinking yes, and then we go through that application and make the best decision that we possibly can. And we know this, and I tell your students this: I will not ever know everything that you or your student think that I should know about them in this process, but I'm going to know enough because I've got all of those puzzle pieces. I've got all of those people working in partnership to shine a spotlight on your students. But what I truly appreciate about the committee process when it comes to fairness is there is a recognition of bias, but we're biased in ways that will often surprise families, and we're biased in ways that actually create balance. We check one another in committee, and it's not done out of a sense of maliciousness or ill intent. It's a way to actually say, well, okay, I see that you're reading it that way. Can we get a read behind on this student? And it's not calling into question the good work that has already been done on an application. But when I get to exist and work in a realm where we read and we discuss each and every applicant, we're being asked about curriculums. We're being asked about the structure and the format of schools. We're saying, are students limited in the number of advanced level courses they can take? Are there things that would preclude a student from being able to pursue this particular academic track, right? We are looking for indicators within the student's application. Hey, that sophomore year looks pretty rocky. Is there anything else we can see or learn from the recommendations that might have been going on at that time? You know, it's the fact that we really look to understand a student within his or her context. And I think a really huge theme that I've been hearing as I have hosted and done other panels and conversations like this is students and families deserve a lot of grace and flexibility right now, especially. Your students have seen more change in the world of college admission than has happened in the last decade, in the last 6 months. And it's a lot to respond to and navigate, and we understand that. But I also like to point out, we've experienced more change in the last 6 months than we have in the last decade. And while I truly believe that many good policies are going to come of this, we also have to grant ourselves grace and flexibility. And that's part of the way that we look at this fairness, right? We are also understanding that second semester, junior year, last year for your students, and for senior year look very, very different. Some students don't have access to the internet in a way that really allows them to work through their senior year courses the way they had planned or wanted to. Maybe courses aren't being offered. So we're going to take that lens into this reading cycle, and we're going to continue to check ourselves. And if I have a question about what a student had access to or what they were going to be capable of, I get to call and ask. I think that there's a level of advocacy that you've got to put forward when you're working with larger places. But I see my colleagues at those large institutions looking at this with the same lens of compassion, because we want to get it right. We want to get it right for us, yes, but we want to get it right for you and your students. And that may sound very Pollyanna as I put it forward, but it's true, because we take our work seriously. We're thinking about crafting successful communities where we get to see our students come in and thrive and graduate. I think that the resilience that I have seen from students and their families in the last 6 months is incredible. On my campus, many students who were grieving the loss of their senior years, who were grieving the loss of their communities that they love so much about Davidson, and they were coming to us and saying, how can we help you yield this class of 2024? Right? What can we do to help? And they have continued to show up in that way. We have 1,700 of our 2,000 students on campus this fall. And the way that they have supported one another while social distancing and being responsible is something that I really applaud them for. And then for the juniors and seniors I'm working with right now who are in high school, the resilience and the fortitude and the commitment that these students are showing up to high school visits for, the fact that they are showing up at 8 o'clock on a Monday night for an essay writing workshop, they're taking the responsibility. I'm actually seeing more things to really love and appreciate in these students and than I've seen in years. They're amazing human beings. And I think that for the most part, they could teach adults a thing or two about how to navigate this global pandemic You know, I feel like I'm learning a lot from the way these students are conducting themselves, and that's going to be reflected in our process.
And I just want to take a second to thank you for your grace and compassion as technical difficulties booted me out of this meeting for a little while. And like, why is Courtney Campbell a pro? She comes on, it's like, oh, Jack's not here. I got it. I'll run. We're all good to go.
Dog barking in the background, and that's the most vocal she's been in 6 months.
It's a real top-notch organization we're running here. It's just like, you know, polished product that we're delivering. So I tried putting it in the chat and then I got kicked out. So who knows if you saw it, but you know, I think one last question from me, and then I would love to open it up to parents if there's any last kind of like Q&A that you might have, parents, about specific testing policies or things that you didn't feel like we covered. But Courtney, you talked a lot about looking ahead, and as we think about this summer and these last 6 months and everything that's happening, like where do you see things going in the next 5 years for Davidson? You talked about a 3-year test optional policy. You know, as we're counseling our students now to kind of be on the front end of that, how do you see that front end looking if we look into as we all can't really make plans 2 weeks in advance, let's look 5 years in advance and see what that's going to look like.
I think that, you know, from an admission standpoint, I'm going to stick with that thought around fairness for just a moment. I think that we've learned a lot in the last 6 months. You know, Davidson is a place that is firmly committed to access, right? The other reason I said yes when this job was offered is the college had just launched. It had been need blind for years and continues to be. But it had just launched something called the Davidson Trust, which is a no loan financial aid policy, right? And so we, you know, picture ourselves as champions for access. We are a QuestBridge partner school. We work with college access organizations around the country and around the world. But I think that one thing that this has really done for us in terms of a reflection on access is, you know, we travel a lot. We get out there, we're speaking to families and schools and students. But I think about how many students who did not have access to us. They weren't going to be able to visit campus. They weren't going to be able to get a sense of where we are. And what we've actually seen in the last 6 months is the doors have been blown wide open. We're not hosting visitors to campus, but what we've been able to put forward virtually has opened the doors for a lot of students and their families. Yes, they're not seeing us, and we think that we show beautifully, and hopefully when we get back to normal, some of you will come and visit us. But it's been exciting to see what we've been able to do. Live guided tours, Q&As where we're really highlighting the student admission counselor connection. We have an on-campus summer program called July Experience that's 3 weeks, and it's meant to give students kind of a test run of the liberal arts college experience. We couldn't do that this summer, so we offered something called the admission intensives, you know, and it was this 1 week long boot camp. And with that boot camp, and Jack just very kindly dropped that in, it gives students opportunities to learn about the college search and application process that are not Davidson specific. We know that we are helping students who never would have applied to us. But here's what that actually does for us, and it's something that I've been really emphasizing for years as we've crafted message. It tells students and families more about the ethos of who and what we are. Than us talking about our fantastic facilities or our research opportunities. We're happy to talk about those, but I think that we're going to continue to do that. You know, even as we get to go back out on the road, we're going to keep looking at these points of access. You know, I did say, I think that we'll hold to this test optional policy, but I think that we're also, schools are going to have to get a lot better, and this is going to be across the board. When students aren't taking tests, whether they can't access them or maybe the system slowly starts to move away from typical standardized testing, how are we going to identify those students with great potential? Us, you know, you all live in households where you receive a lot of mail that you did not ask for. And it's because when students took tests, they listed some schools that they were interested in. They shared their parameters and information about them. And we kind of buy those names and get the word out. Well, we're not going to be able to do that for the next few cycles. So we're going to have to get creative about the way that we message and reach out to students and families. And I'm excited about that because, you know, if we're going to say testing is the last thing we consider, or we're not going to consider it anymore, why are we basing our initial searches on that. So that's more in the weeds than you all needed to know. But that's something I'm really excited about with the change.
Well, I actually think it brings up a great point about how college searching is different in this cycle for both juniors and seniors, because sometimes, we're so used to that you walk around campus and then you fall in love, instead of when you're doing these workshops that are available online. If I'm considering Davidson, I go to a Davidson workshop. I then see how Davidson works and a little bit of that, like you said, that ethos, and that could apply to any school. You can get out there and it's more participatory in some ways than it might be before. Courtney just put her email in the chat. She is a fantastic, if you couldn't tell already, a fantastic conversation partner as you're thinking about things. Davidson is one of those hidden Ivy schools that we talked about on junior and senior night that is coming to visit campus with a rep visit. So it's definitely, if it's something, hey, maybe I should be adding that to a list, talk to your son's counselor and we can talk about that. But at this point, if there are questions from you, our parent partners, like things that you want to know about testing or holistic admissions or Davidson or college admissions in general, you have a fantastic expert in the field sitting right in front of you right now. So by all means.
It's like I'm looking at the few people we can see on screen going, is anyone typing?
Is anyone typing? I once got the piece of advice that however long you would wait for someone to answer a question in a classroom on a Zoom, you have to wait twice as long. And it's just like.
We've got a good one and it's a great one.
Okay.
So my son has heard mixed reviews on whether to talk about the COVID pandemic in the essay. My thoughts. So here's what I told students the other night, and here's what I will tell anytime I'm asked this question. The common application, the coalition application, in most places with institutional applications, Davidson has all three, plus QuestBridge. We've all added this little kind of extra short response question about the impact that COVID has had on the student's life. And if the impact on COVID has been, my junior year was cut short, I can't do my extracurriculars, I was supposed to be captain of this team, I'm not, it's up to them whether or not they want to say that in that section. That section is actually more intended for, information about family impact. Was there illness? Was there a job loss? Was there a shift? Something like that. I encourage students to explore the use of that prompt to share their COVID experience. A very small percentage of students will have encountered an experience with COVID that really merits writing their long essay about it. Very, very few. Because my hope is that for students, they do not define their high school experience. They do not define themselves by the last 6 months. They are more than that. I always tell your students, you're more than just any one thing. You're more than a student body president. You're more than a really smart guy. You're more than the captain of a team. You are the sum of your parts. And I think that, I want students to recognize this as a huge part or experience in their lives, but not a definitive one. For a few, it will be a definitive part, but for most, it will not. So I really, truly encourage students to embrace writing about something else in their essay that that their application would be incomplete without, right? Something only they can share.
And I think this is a great opportunity to get with your son and your counselor together and really talk about that experience and say, is this better coming from me in my essay, or is it better coming from you in a counselor letter? And sometimes it's that complain versus explain split. Is it me as your counselor explaining, hey, this kid would have been the captain of the team, or this kid, he was peaking at the right time. We had numerical grades in the second semester. Is it just me explaining how your grades were changed over that time? Or is it better, hey, this was a really personal experience for me? And it might not necessarily be COVID specific, but COVID highlighting another aspect of your life. That if you had a meaningful relationship that was forever altered as a result of this, yeah, that's something we're talking about. parent job loss, or if your parent is a first responder and the stress that you carry, you know, especially in March and April. Those are things that might be an essay where you're ultimately talking not necessarily about the pandemic, but it's a character in your own story, that it's something that you're working with.
And the last thing I'll add is this was something that was added on probably about a month and a half into the pandemic, because I woke up in a cold sweat on a Sunday morning, probably in mid-April. And I have this crew of wonderful counselors at other schools that I travel with. We kind of travel in this pack around the Northeast. And I texted them all. It was like 7:30 and I was like, oh, the essays. It's going to be about COVID. And it's all going to start with junior year didn't turn out as I had planned. And kind of reading that over and over again. And I think within a matter of 2 weeks, this prompt kind of came forward and we're like, all right, good. We get to focus on, yes, there might be something of impact that you want to talk about, but go for something that gives us a broader sense of who you are. Because again, we're looking for that good fit for our community. What are some ways that you gauge a student's interest in your school? Is that important? It will be different for different places. This is called demonstrated interest. And some schools will be like, we don't look at demonstrated interest at all. If a student applies, that demonstrates interest. And yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that what we want to see is that a student has done his or her research. We're a small place, strong emphasis on community. We're known for our academic rigor. We want to know that when a student applies to us, that they put in some work, and that's going to be reflected in their short response, why Davidson? But I love it when I see that students have taken advantage of opportunities to get to know us a little bit better. We don't conduct interviews, but we have these fantastic opportunities for students to have small group or one-on-one sessions with current students. So not me. It is more important to me that a student interacts with another student, a current Davidson student or a professor, than interacting with me. I'm a resource. I'm happy to schedule Zoom calls with students, and I do. But I love it when students show up to these visits. I say this at your senior night when I have the privilege of being on your actual campus. You know, we come to your schools because we're excited to meet your students, right? And we know that sometimes classes don't allow for that, but just kind of even contact points are really, really nice, because one of the things, if you're a smaller place and you get to say yes to 1 out of 5 of your applicants, one of the things in the back of our minds is, if we say yes to this amazing student, do we have a shot at them saying yes to us?
And I think this is a question that pops up a lot in terms of, you know, when we think about the class of 2020, how that's going to impact the class of 21, or even further down the road, deferred admissions or gap years, like however people may have responded because of remote learning. And again, this is one of those, it's evolving, that the numbers, I think, continue to shift. As you talked about, not all of your students are on campus right now.
Right. It doesn't, the interesting thing though, when you hear me say 1,700 of our 2,000 students are on campus, understand that that doesn't mean that 300 deferred.
Right, exactly.
300 are at home working remotely, because we offered kind of a range of classes. We've got in-person, hybrid, remote. We have a lot of international students who could not square away their visas to campus this fall. So many are still at home and will join us on campus in the spring. To really address the concern around this is a concern that gained traction really, really early, and it just held.
Someone wrote an article, and I feel it was like April, and it's like, that's the article that we keep on pointing to. So Courtney, go into the story here.
Really, really quickly, I will tell you how many students deferred admission from Davidson's class of 2024, which is our current first year class. 4. That is fewer than normally defer, right? Because I think a lot of students were like, I'm going to defer. This isn't going to be the experience I wanted. And then they had to sit back and reflect and say, defer to do what? Right? You know, there weren't the options. So we had students who had told us that they were going to defer from our early decision pool. And they had these amazing plans. And then they circled back to us and said, yeah, that international experience has been canceled. I would very much like to be on campus with you in the fall. So we actually had 4. So I see 0 impact for your students.
And the feedback that I've gotten from multiple other admissions reps is similar, that it is a number. It's not 0, but it's also not, I think it is, people are very afraid of that number. But it is so far, I would say, in terms of just general admissions.
It's a great question to ask for all of the schools, because different schools will have different experiences. I think that the norm of what I hear from from the institutions that I cross-app with, it's a low number.
So we're ending on some good news there. Any other questions from our parents? Maybe something that we didn't cover today, or something you want to hear just a little bit more about, or a little bit more detail?
I'm going to make a plug as you consider your questions. I'm going to go back to that admission intensives link that you were kind enough to drop in. There is a panel discussion that we are hosting on September 30th in the evening. It's at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'm highlighting that one because yes, I'm on it. You have to listen to me again. However, I have wonderful colleagues from other institutions who are going to be on that call with me. Daryl Jones from Gettysburg College in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is going to be on that call. Shane McGuire from Vanderbilt University in Nashville will be on that call. I have a wonderful woman named Jasmine Brown who represents Xavier University of Louisiana. It's an HBCU, will be on that call. And we have a woman named Barb Strickland from UNC Charlotte, which is one of the UNC system schools, who will also be on that call. We hosted this panel back in July. We found that those presenters were so incredible in addressing parent and student questions that we are bringing that same group of panelists back together. And it gives you a sense of what small liberal arts, highly selective mid-sized research universities, and larger publics are doing. And I would encourage you, feel free to register for that. It's completely free, but it's going to give you a range of perspective and experience that I don't see on even the best panels that I'm on when we're able to travel, because that range is really important.
And while we're giving plugs, I would also say for your students, we have a workshop later on today, one at 9 a.m. and one at 10 a.m. with Sarah Cronin from Catholic University. So those links are available. If they check Teams, they'll have a team announcement for college counseling updates with the link that's available. And then next week on Wednesday, we're going to have Greg Cherry from Providence College, who's going to be doing an admission case study review. So basically walking us through, Courtney gave us the big picture, like why they do what they do. And it's going to be a very technical look at how is an application read and how they go through that process. And perhaps most importantly, Courtney is coming back on November 2nd. She's going to be doing an admission rep visit on November 2nd. So if you like what you hear, and you should, because Davidson's amazing, by all means, sort of give your son a gentle nudge in that direction. Courtney, okay, yep, we gave the time and date for that seminar.
And you can register for it at that link that dropped in the chat earlier.
Beautiful. Thank you everyone so much for joining us this morning. Courtney, thank you for being the first fall 2020 guest on Counselor Coffee. It's we're kicking the show off. It's all good.
Thank you very much. Poppy says thank you for allowing her to sing to you. We really appreciate that. She's getting it out of her school visits I have later in the day.
Yeah.
Just like
there we go.
Previous Beyond CM is also happy that you are all able to participate. So it's a true team effort as we get through this year. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.